Every car tells a story, but not every chapter is a triumph. Some models start with the roar of greatness, only to lose their shine as time goes on. In this video, we'll explore the glow-downs, those cars that once represented the pinnacle of design, power, and innovation. But over time, within their own lineups, they became shadows of their former selves. These aren't just isolated failures. They're part of a greater narrative where a once exceptional model took a downturn, lost its spark, or simply couldn't live up to the legacy of its predecessors. From dramatic design shifts to performance losses, we'll take you through the cars that fell short of their own standards within their series. Stay tuned for a journey through automotive history, where greatness faded and expectations were left unmet. The Mazda Rx-8 was a masterpiece, an icon of its era, celebrated for its sleek design, thrilling performance, and rotary magic. It was the car that made hearts race, a dream on wheels. Then came the Rx-8, and while it tried to carry the rotary torch, something went terribly wrong. The elegant curves of the Rx-8 gave way to a design that felt awkward, confused, and far less timeless. Mazda added quirky rear-hinge doors for practicality, but they only diluted the sporty essence. And the engine? While still rotary, it lacked the punch and reliability that enthusiasts cherished. The Rx-8 was a shadow of its predecessor, innovative but missing the soul that made the Rx-7 legendary. For many, it felt like the rotary's swan song ended on a sour note. Let's talk about the 6 Series, a name once synonymous with elegance and power. When you think of the F06 Grand Coupe or the stunning E63, you picture sleek designs, roaring engines, and a car that turned heads on the road. But then came the G32, and suddenly the magic seemed to fade. This wasn't just a 6 Series, it felt like something entirely different. The G32 inherited the practicality of the 5 Series GT, but in doing so, it lost the soul of its predecessors. The design, while functional, lacked the elegance and drama that had defined the lineup for decades. And let's not forget the absence of an M version, a glaring omission that seemed to confirm BMW didn't see it as a true heir to the 6 Series legacy. Sure, it's a fine car in its own right, but it's not the car enthusiasts dreamed of when they thought of the 6 Series badge. Instead of luxury and performance seamlessly united, the G32 became a jack-of-all-trades that didn't quite master the art of being a 6 Series. And while the introduction of the 8 Series may explain some of this shift, for many fans, the G32 was a step too far from what made this lineup iconic. The Pontiac GTO, a name once synonymous with raw power and unbridled muscle. In the 1960s and 70s, it didn't just dominate roads, it defined an era. But by the 2000s, when the 5th generation returned, the story took a sharp turn for the worse. Gone was the bold, aggressive design that made the GTO a legend. Instead, the new model looked more like a mid-tier rental car than a street king. The styling was bland, the presence muted, and the spirit seemed lost. Yes, it packed a punch under the hood, but even that wasn't enough to save it from its identity crisis. Meanwhile, rivals like the Dodge Charger, Ford Mustang, and Chevy Camaro also had their rough patches. But by the late 2000s, they were roaring back into a new golden era. The GTO. It couldn't keep up. The 5th generation was so underwhelming that production ended in 2006. And just a few years later, Pontiac itself closed its doors for good. The fall of the GTO is more than a story of a car. It's a cautionary tale of what happens when an icon forgets its roots. A car that once symbolized rebellion and power faded into obscurity, leaving us to wonder what could have been. What would you call a vehicle that could find any path? be it through deserts, swamps, or mountains. Naturally, a Pathfinder. For years, Nissan's Pathfinder lived up to its name, built tough on a body-on-frame, truck-based design that could tackle any terrain. But in 2013, everything changed. The Pathfinder traded its rugged off-road identity for a unibody design, prioritizing comfort and fuel efficiency over adventure. Sure, it became a smoother family hauler, but it also became ordinary. No longer the daring explorer it once was, today's Pathfinder is content to stick to paved roads and easy trails. It doesn't find paths anymore, it simply takes the ones already laid out. And for a vehicle with such a legendary name, that feels like a journey in the wrong direction. The Volkswagen Passat B3 marked a radical departure from its predecessors, and not in the best way. Gone was the classic, familiar charm that earlier Passats carried. Instead, the B3 introduced a grille-less front end and boxy design that, rather than evoking sophistication, looked more like a household appliance on wheels. Some called it minimalist, others saw it as lifeless. Without a proper grille, the B3 lacked the personality and identity of a traditional Volkswagen. It was a stark contrast to the cohesive and confident designs that came before, leaving many enthusiasts scratching their heads. Sure, it was practical and well-built, but as an emotional or aspirational vehicle, it missed the mark entirely. The Dodge Dart was once a symbol of raw American muscle, a car that could dominate streets and strips alike, embodying the untamed energy of its era. Models like the Demon didn't just exist, they redefined what performance and attitude could mean, becoming icons of rebellion and speed. But when the name was resurrected in 2013, the spark was gone. Instead of a bold statement, Dodge presented a car that felt cautious, uninspired, and disconnected from its legendary heritage. It wasn't the daring contender of old, but a safe, forgettable sedan that failed to stand out. The reborn Dart didn't just lose its edge, it lost its identity. For a name synonymous with power and defiance, this muted return was a disappointment too significant to ignore. Once upon a time, the Chevrolet Impala stood tall as a symbol of power and prestige, roaring through streets and hearts alike. It was the car, a legend. But then came the 8th generation, and something went terribly wrong. The design lost its edge, trading charisma for something painfully bland, uninspired, and utterly forgettable. And let's talk about power. Once a mighty beast under the hood, this version was tamed into mediocrity. It's hard to even call this car an Impala anymore. No, it's more like Kamala. A bold name for sure, but let's be honest. This car couldn't win an election either. And while the Impala nameplate continued after this disaster, it never truly regained its former glory. Chevrolet tried to move forward, but by then, the magic was long gone. Before we dive into the last car of today's list, be sure to check out our previous video on glow-ups, and don't forget to subscribe to our Telegram, X, and of course, listen to our podcasts on Apple and Spotify. Now, the biggest glow-down, in my opinion, the 3rd generation of the Mercedes-Benz CLS. If I could design the perfect CLS, I'd take the front end from the 1st generation and the rear from the 2nd. Those rear lights are not just details, they're pure art, the most beautiful in the entire universe. And what did they do with the 3rd gen? It's not really a CLS anymore. Sure, if they gave it to me for free, I'd drive it. But this is no longer the CLS we once knew.